Hello, everyone. Incredibly excited to be speaking today at the Reframing Supply Chain Decarbonisation when it comes to specifically the fashion industry. My name is Lubomila and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Plan A. We have been working on the topic of sustainability, fashion, and decarbonisation in particular for the last 7 years. And we've learned a lot throughout these years. We've worked with a lot of large luxury companies as well as also up-and-coming brands. And in particular, in the context of this industry, there's been so many shifts related to the legislation, related to the perception of the customer, related to how value chains also have been impacted by climate change and supply chain and legislation, which is why we decided to kick off these masterclasses. And today, it's my great pleasure and honor to be part of a session that is dedicated specifically to the topic of decarbonization, the connection between economic and environmental value that a business brings within this context, and give a little bit of a view, not only from the sustainability professional perspective, but also bringing in the view of the fashion industry expert. And we have an incredibly special guest that I'm honored to welcome. But first and foremost, maybe kind of kicking off with a few words of why does this topic even matter. Sustainability is a buzzword in many people's minds when it comes to industry dynamics. There's been, of course, a lot of talk about the topic, but clearly not everyone yet has understood why do we have a problem with fast fashion, why overproduction is an issue, and do we really even need to decarbonize? We wanted to make it really practical, and with this session in particular, we want to actually connect the dots between two topics. One is carbon pricing, and the other one is sustainability. And what does this mean? We actually have been looking into this and have been considering what does this really mean in the context of the expansion of the fashion industry, the expansion of the consumers, also options and types of choices that are there, and unfortunately in the growth of also not the most sustainable practices within this industry. So what is carbon pricing? Carbon pricing is a policy tool that is used to reduce greenhouse gases, and also it allows for the assignment of a particular cost associated to carbon emissions. In a way, it incentivizes businesses to lower their carbon footprint and start thinking in a more sustainable manner, where they connect the dots between the economic and the environmental value of the existence of the business. There's a few elements that need to be considered when it comes to why actually this matters for any fashion company. And I will highlight just a few before I invite Iva, our guest, to stage. That will share in a lot of depth why this really matters. A few things that need to be considered in the context of carbon pricing. Production costs. Carbon pricing could increase the cost of production, particularly of materials, and the processes due to the energy consumption, and due to obviously processes that are heavily reliant on fossil fuels. There's also an element that is related to supply chain management. Fashion brands need to reassess their supply chain to be able to minimize their carbon costs. And the more they produce and the less they understand of their environmental footprint, the more resources that they're wasting or not utilizing to the maximum potential that they have. There's also, of course, the element of the consumer pricing. The cost of carbon pricing could be passed down to the consumer. There's a lot of debate about this, and we'll spend some time with Eva actually discussing this. And finally, there's the regulatory compliance. In a nutshell, I think what's really critical for anyone to understand, and with this, I actually will zoom into Eva and would invite for us to be kind of joined and discuss all of this a little bit before she kicks off her presentation. I want to mention that our work now that has been with more than 1,500 businesses has shown that the thought of sustainability at any stage is really critical because there's a lot of legislation. But the earlier business thinks about this, the better the business is prepared for the future, for a future where there's consumer preference shifts, there's supply chain shifts, material unavailability, and also there's cost of inaction. And obviously what matters most is that when a business kicks off this journey, immediately the thought is about decarbonization, exactly in the context of what I was mentioning, which is what does it cost to not understand overproduction, to not understand the cost of fast fashion that ends up actually having external impacts on pricing, and so on and so forth. With this little interlude, I am more than excited to invite Iva, that has a stellar career and history behind her and ahead of her. She has been an incredibly successful expert in the design field, and most recently decided to spend some time educating herself on sustainability, going through even some professional courses, which she's going to tell us a little bit about. But Iva, first of all, thank you so much for having kind of the chance to speak to us. We're incredibly honored and incredibly happy to have you here. I want to ask, before you kick off your presentation, why did you decide to spend time on educating yourself on sustainability as a fashion expert?
Hi, everyone. Well, I come from the side of product, of design, of development. So for me, it was plain to see so many of the issues that are now becoming buzzwords in this field for many, many years. And I was convinced that this whole sustainable fashion thing is a myth. So, as you say, I did want to educate myself because I thought there must be some solutions. There must be some cleverer people than me that have figured something out that I don't know. Or maybe there is something that is not working because the perspective of those that are not really, inside the sustainability echo chamber are not being heard, or maybe they're not being allowed to voice opinions. So maybe that was something that I could bring into this conversation. And actually, this is how I decided to frame today's talk a little bit. So I'll be speaking really from the point of view of the broader teams, and especially from those designing and developing product, making product. So I hope that's challenging for our audience today. Maybe it brings some new perspectives. Maybe it gives them new ideas of how to really take a system level view of this complicated topic of decarbonization, and maybe also have a new approach as to how to frame it when they approach it with their teams.
Amazing. Before we kick off, because I know the audience today is of a lot of people that are leading innovation, that are leading sustainability in big fashion companies, big sports companies, also a lot of companies that are established family businesses within the fashion space. I wanted to just ask maybe a bit of a provocative question before we kick off of what is the difference between your perspective on sustainability and the perspective of someone that is maybe in the sales department of a fashion company?
That's an interesting question. I think being kind of in the front line where you're seeing how product is actually made, how many different processes go into the making of a product, and how important it is to really tackle these issues from the very start. I sometimes speak about a cultural shift because it's almost like the most influential people in the company come at the very, very beginning. So you need them to have buy-in to be able to have a real impact at the very end. So salespeople have demands from customers. It's almost like it's a loop, because we generate buzz and demand for certain sustainable alternatives and so forth, but they don't necessarily understand what it takes to create the product and to really action this change.
Mm-hmm. With this in mind, I want to give you the floor for those of you just joining now, as I see that through the different channels where people are watching this event, there's people joining in the last few minutes. We will be now getting into the presentation where Iva will share a little bit more details about the practical challenges that a fashion company has in order to transition to a more sustainable mode. Iva, the floor is yours, and thank you again for being with us.
Thank you so much for the invite. Let me make the presentation the biggest thing you can see on the screen. So you signed up for this Fashion Masterclass series, so you probably are well aware that this is the first of 3 webinars. And in the next 2, the Plan A team will give you a lot of very specific technical information, examples of how they've approached this question of decarbonization, what tools they've used with their customers, and how, and so forth. So as I already mentioned, when trying to think of how to approach this first introductory webinar in the series, we thought we'd go with a broader view and really try and provoke you into reframing how you think about decarbonization, how you think about approaching it with your teams. And I will touch on, I think, 5 big topics that for me are really essential to ensure a successful sustainability strategy, and with that, obviously, a decarbonization strategy. As I said, I'm going to speak as a sustainability expert, but also as a product expert, as someone who spent most of their career until now working on product. And with that, throughout my career, I really had the opportunity to observe how sustainability became a big part of the discussion. One of my first roles after graduating from the Royal College of Art in London was at Christopher Kane. That was at the time part of the Caring Group, and the Caring Group was really going through this big transition into making sustainability a core value in their business, in their practice. So from that point on, you know, almost every company that I've worked with, whether it's in this list or not, has had some kind of a sustainability strategy, carbon accounting report prepared, or just expressed interest in being very sustainable. And like, none of it really seemed to work. And just industry-wide, it seemed like really the important issues are not being addressed. So I started asking myself, why isn't it working? Like, what is going on? So I, as Lou mentioned, did some courses at the University of Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership, at Harvard Extension School, trying to understand the different approaches of how sustainability leaders look at the issues, how consultants look at the issues, and what I think is missing. And really the inspiration for like today's webinar came from this McKinsey article from April 2024, stating that 40% of fashion brands have seen their emissions outputs increase since making their sustainability commitments. And there is actually a Fashion Revolution report that came out very recently. It's a special edition of their transparency index, focusing on carbon, on fuel in the fashion industry. And it comes to sort of the same conclusion that as commitments increase, emissions seem to be rising. So it's strange, isn't it? We seem to know what the problem is. We seem to know what at least some of the solutions are. We have a lot of the tools to make those work. And yet, again, it just seems to not be working. And to kind of like really extreme degrees, like Shein, for example, who's like the biggest player on the fashion scene at the moment, is a brand that purports voluntary ESG commitments, but its emissions are only increasing at a massive rate of 80% between 2022 and 2023. So clearly, as an industry, we're doing something wrong. So from that McKinsey analysis, they propose 6 actions to address like the 6 major challenges to sustainability in the fashion industry. And I will allow you a few moments just to consider those. And maybe the first one where we talk about creating commercial value, this also kind of goes back to putting a price on carbon. But I think, especially when we look at number 2, focusing on big 2, material transition and tier 2 supplier energy, there is a very big miss. So I don't know if you can think of what is missing from this list. But for me, that thing that is missing is overproduction. Overproduction is the first issue I want to talk to you about today. The scale of this problem in the fashion industry is massive. We've got around 150 billion garments produced in the year 2012. So this is according to the seminal report by Kristi Niinimäki, I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, that brought the issue to the forefront. But this for me was something that, again, as a practitioner, I had been noticing for so long. We were just making so much waste and not addressing it. In fact, it was considered like a value to the business. 1/3 of all the clothes, all the apparel that is produced in the world is never sold. So the mass scale, it really amplifies all the socio-environmental impacts. And however you frame it, whether you think of it through the perspective of carbon, whether you think of it through the perspective of achieving the SDGs, we're not just talking about SDG 12 here that concerns itself with overproduction and overconsumption. We're talking about the impacts on every single aspect of what we're making. That's 92 million tons a year of pre and post consumer waste. And I thought a lot about whether I put overproduction at the beginning or the end of this presentation, but I think it's important to consider it as the context of what we're doing as we go on. And in the next 3 weeks, as you attend the next seminars, I think it will be really helpful to remember kind of the ghost of overproduction, that this is really the system we're working within, because it's really ingrained in how we do things. Overproduction happens at every single stage of the fashion supply chain. And the fashion value chain, I have to say, because it also goes not just upstream, but downstream. There's a lot of multi-stakeholder initiatives in the fashion industry, and a report found that they mostly focus on material circularity, preferred materials, measuring environmental impacts, but none of those actually address the toll of overproduction. And all the environmental gains are offset by the unrelated growth in production, which is really, really scary. If we look at Shein again, it's been calculated that they need to reduce their emissions by 60%, not by their target at 25%, to meet their target of 30% reduction in 6 years that they stated in their 2023 report. So, they say, oh, but we are doing a lot of work. We've partnered with the Apparel Impact Initiative, and we've worked on 28 sites, and we've managed to reduce our outputs by 46,000 metric tons. That amounts to 0.0002%. So clearly that's not going to be enough. If you look at these two slides, I think they illustrate perfectly when they're put like this next to each other, the scale of the issue we're facing, how population growth aligned with the growth of apparel production until about the 1990s, mid-1990s, and then the production of polyester absolutely exploded. And with that, the thing that exploded was the landfilling of textiles. And why this is important is because if we really take a system view, as I was saying earlier, we start seeing a lot of other issues. When we're talking about oil extraction, we go into environmental issues, into human rights, but also even crazier, a lot of the petrol that's used to create polyester for fast fashion brands these days was found to be actually with a provenance from Russian oil, which is kind of another can of worms that we don't even need to get into. But if you start digging deep enough, you find a lot of complicated issues that need to be addressed. If we think about recycling, like maybe we can recycle our way out of this. Well, recycling is also very energy intensive. Where is this energy coming from? Can we really guarantee that this is green energy? How do we even define green energy? And how do we even achieve a quality product when we recycle? So it's a complicated topic that we're getting into. And it's not just a problem for fast fashion. I kind of think of it as a mirror image when it comes to fast fashion and luxury fashion. In luxury fashion, you add a buffer and you keep stock back to preserve brand value. So you don't really create end of life waste in the same way as a kind of low value fast fashion does, but you still create huge levels of overstock that is hard to eliminate. And even though that might not be landfilled, still the amount of energy, the amount of work, the amount of resources that go into creating that is very, very significant. And you can see this in this graph by the Business of Fashion, that actually we can call it like luxury's dirty little secret, that luxury is trying to become fast luxury. It's trying to imitate the speed and the volume with which fast fashion is working. With that, you cannot really create luxury products, and really the results, I think, are very, very visible in this graph. Why am I saying all this? Because again, this is how the business of fashion works nowadays. This is so ingrained that that is business as usual. But business as usual is an attempt to sustain the unsustainable. John Elkington says that many of the current business models will become obsolete, and business leaders need to accept that and need to start addressing that. But even kind of more provocatively, in an article he published recently that is linked below, and I think you get the link in your chat, he quotes Joubert, a friend of his, that if you put good people in a stupid system, they tend to become stupid too. So let's not be stupid. Let's start examining our system. What is the business as usual at the moment? So starting from within, what does your current sustainability team have to deal with? 160 legislative frameworks, 1,174 KPIs as part of CSRD, 500 KPIs as part of CPD, many more to come. I stole this slide from Lou's presentation. But ask yourself, first of all, is there reporting fatigue for your team? Do they even have time to deal with anything else but reporting? Do they have time to really work on strategy, to consider the full system, to really examine the processes, to be able to go beyond reporting? And the second question, whether the answer is yes or no, for me is whether there is wider team buy-in. Do you have buy-in from the rest of your operation? Do you have allies really in key positions that will help you achieve your goals? Because it really takes a village. I really like this article that Times Magazine published, I think it was just last week, about the number of people it takes to produce various various items. So they had an example of a Bottega Veneta bag with over 30 people, and it takes about a year. I would argue that it probably takes more than 30 people if we really, again, look at the full supply chain from creating the raw materials. So whether that's elevating livestock or growing the necessary plants. So I think in an environment where we overuse resources to such a degree, one resource that is actually not being used efficiently and truly like kind of harvested or fostered is the human resource. And this is important because the favorite statistic of anyone that's I think attended a sustainability course at Cambridge in particular is that 80% of a product's impact is determined at a design phase. What does this mean? That again, this first phase, this first step is incredibly important. And I'll tell you a little story. So when I was working at Christopher Kane, Kering, our mother brand, our mother company, decided to ban PVC for various reasons, because PVC during the time of production contains forever chemicals that can be extremely harmful to the people producing the PVC. Let's say the argument from European producers or sellers of PVC was that their PVC didn't contain that, so it should be fine. But there was a huge outcry from Greenpeace at the time, so Kering succumbed and banned PVC in their operations. The thing about PVC, though, is that PVC is recyclable. And that exact year, that exact moment in time, Christopher Kane, the head designer of the company I was working for, this Kering-owned company that I was working for, decided that he wanted to have a collection that was full of kind of transparent appliques, transparent windows, which would normally be made in PVC. So we had to try and find an alternative material that would look like PVC, but is not PVC, because our mother brand had banned the use of PVC. So finally, we ended up making PU panels, which were extremely expensive, which I would argue were worse for the environment because PU cannot be recycled, but it achieved the look. Why am I telling you this story? Because clearly there was no desire from design, from this company to really follow this rule, this PVC rule. So when creating a strategy, it's very important to really have the right arguments to have the buy-in from your team. And I think you need buy-in from design on one hand, and the second best ally you will ever have is whoever is in charge of product development, whether that's a development manager, a collection director, whoever it is. This will be your best friend, because that's the person that knows how things tick in a company. And I would argue that really to create a shift towards sustainability, you need to create this cultural shift in design, because at the speed that things happen in fashion nowadays, it's so difficult to be creative. It's so difficult to make things that really to add an element that kind of messes up with the design process is very, very stressful. But this is like at the heart of your company. That's where it's like an onion. That's the heart of the onion, and everything else kind of grows around it. Actually, I don't know if that's how an onion grows, but it doesn't matter. And if you've seen the previous sustainability, fashion sustainability seminar that Plan A offered, there was Maria Zbiti from Pangaia speaking, and she said something that I found really interesting. She said that when building a team, you need generalists at the beginning and then making them into specialists. But I would challenge that, and I would say that for established companies, you need to use your greatest resource, and that is the specialist that you already have on board. And I particularly like this quote from Mark Buckley. Everyone is a sustainability officer because it is everyone's responsibility to make progress. We should all daily be actively contributing to sustainability within each of our job roles and areas of expertise. And again, I think this is really important because it came out in a publication about the 100 most influential, best chief sustainability officers in Europe by Future.io. And Future.io's founder, Harold Nygaard, also hosts a podcast where he interviews CSOs. And this is a sentiment that a lot of them echo, that you need your team, your broader team, to be part of your mission, to really have buy-in, to be able to have true impact and affect true change. So I would say human resource is people plus time. What does that mean? You need to use people's knowledge and expertise, but also give them the time and space to act and voice ideas, as well as execute on those ideas. Time is such a precious resource in the fashion industry. Everything moves at such a speed that just asking people to do something on top of their job might not always lead to the best results, but giving them the space to voice ideas is just equally as important. And I think LVMH recently had an initiative where they just opened the floor to all the employees of their company, just to make suggestions regarding strategy, regarding product, regarding things they would like to see happen. And taking those into consideration, I thought that that's like a very interesting, very good first step in that direction. I think it's also important to consider that the kind of the limitations here, because if you're using the expertise of your product teams that work very closely with suppliers, with manufacturers, there's always like very delicate human relations, that professional human relations that go into the work they do. So there might be certain questions they're not comfortable asking. There might be certain actions they're not comfortable taking. So it's very important to account for that as well. What human resources is not equal to is jargon. And I think this is the biggest barrier really to having those specialists that, again, I think sometimes see the issues before you do, understand maybe some of the action that can be taken before you do, but they don't know necessarily how to say it. They don't necessarily understand what the impact of what they're seeing is. You know, we deal with what we call like the alphabet soup. And Plane actually have an amazing glossary of terms that maybe they will be willing to share. But I like to speak about a bottom-up activation. And I thought this slide was really funny because, you know, like we've got scope 3 emissions in the fashion value chain, but then you've got tiers at the bottom, and like, but what is scope 3 and how does that align with the tiers? And really, like, we say, oh, well, 98% of this is retailers, but it's similar for the fashion industry and for any business, like between 95, 98% of your emissions actually come from scope 3. But scope 3 doesn't really align with any of the tiers that we can talk about. It doesn't really align with principles of the donut economy or planetary boundaries. And these are real examples of concepts that I was confronted with as a receiver of sustainability strategy. And if you look at the of the kind of the two representations of the donut economy and the planetary boundaries, really the only things that align are climate change and ocean acidification. But I have no idea how I'm responsible for ocean acidification when I'm making a bag. You know, this is too complicated. This is too it's impossible to perceive and to touch as an expert in another field. So I think this is where your role comes, is to understand how you can use your human resource and how you can translate for them what their role is and what their impact could be. And actually, there's this very good fashion on climate report from McKinsey from a few years ago that has the absolute like wildest graphic design ever. But this graph, which is actually quite complicated, I think has very valuable information, because what they do is they break down processes. They break down processes into specific steps. So again, this is something that I think the people on your team that are not specifically engaged with sustainability can understand very well. I think a concept that they can very well understand is that literally a third of the work they do goes to waste. A third of the work you do goes to waste, because this is the reality of a fashion company. The creative work, the work of anyone in a factory you partner with, the resources that you put into, a third of it goes to waste. However, on the flip side, there's a financially compelling case that if you see the red arrow, this like teeny tiny, look at this teeny tiny little sliver, this teeny tiny little sliver that is wastage during garment production. That equals to, so if we have a 2% change in that teeny tiny little sliver, we can have savings of $250,000 over a ton of CO2, over 20 million tons of CO2. So a massive reduction from 2% of this like teeny tiny sliver in this graph. And I think that that's a very good way to kind of start thinking about it. Like, let's break things down into specific processes. Why? Because it's not about building a circle, it's about building a system. And this is a favorite quote of mine from Yuli Fuentes Medel from the Footwear Collective. The Footwear Collective is an amazing initiative. It's a pre-consumer initiative that brings together some of the biggest footwear brands in a mission to figure out ways to make footwear circular, because footwear is one of the most complicated products that we create. Here I want to give you another example. So we were working on fully factored products with a Spanish factory, and we decided to start a traceability project. So we asked them, what is the provenance of the hardware you supply for us? And they said, well, the provenance is from the village next door to ours. And that's obviously not the provenance of the metal. It's not the where the actual hardware was made. But the problem was that, again, like with jargon, they didn't really understand what we were asking. And in that Fashion Revolution report that I think we shared earlier, called What Fuels Fashion, they say this: fashion industry climate impact has largely been scrutinized through the lens of the material used in our clothes rather than the manufacturing processes behind them. So to change that, I think we really need to have a system level view, because as I like to say to Lou here, your scope 3 is somebody else's scope 1. So if you work with your suppliers, if you collaborate with them, educate and support them, you can start creating meaningful change. I think supply chain is actually an excellent term, because a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. So we really need to be creating those links and examining each link to have a strong chain. And I think this is important in two different aspects. One is like kind of a full system view, and the example I wanted to give you was leather. Leather is a kind of a favorite topic of mine, because if you think of leather in terms of circularity, it's actually a very good example of a circular process, because it's the byproduct of another industry. The problem with leather and leather's impact is that recent studies have shown that carbon footprint of leather can vary between 35 and 320 kilograms per meter square for the same article based on how boundaries are set and what parameters are taken as base for the calculation. So it's actually very difficult to find independent data on the impact of leather, because you either have kind of activists that are against leather, vegan organizations, or you've got activists that are like very strongly pro-leather. So I thought the United Nations Industrial Development Organization might be as neutral as it comes. But what do we learn from this like quite funny graphic? Is something that is consistent, and that is that the biggest part of leather's impact comes from cattle farming. It comes from that cheer for rearing of animals. So why isn't it that fashion companies can act at that phase to have true impact? And I think for me, maybe that's a bit controversial, but that would be kind of the good way to offset, because you don't even need to be really proving that, yes, you are producing your leather from that particular cow, because that gets really expensive. But if you can be really acting on supporting better farming initiatives, or technology that captures emissions from cattle farming at the scale of your production, then you're really properly positively offsetting your impact. And I think it's a very important way to look at the system. And then the other example I wanted to give is of how do we examine and support the implementation of solutions along the supply chain. I think maybe the example of Renewcell is very pertinent. If you remember, they went bankrupt earlier this year, and it was quite a big shock to the industry because they had an amazing product and seemingly a lot of demand from brands. The problem was that there wasn't a lot of demand from the actual manufacturers of textiles in Asia. So they were the ones that needed to buy the fiber and take on the investment, take on the risk of feeding it into their supply chain. So it didn't really work. But again, from that Elkington article I mentioned earlier, he says, again, something quite provocative: driving major transformations, you need to take care of the losers. I would say that more softly. You need to identify and address the weak links in your chain. And I think here we can look at the example of Bangladesh. Bangladesh is a country that is largely dependent on its garment sector. 84% of exports come from the garment sector. The country has a mandated minimum wage that a lot of factory owners state that they are unable to pay because of the pressure to keep prices low, because of the low margin of what they're doing. They exist in a country with an energy grid dependent on fossil fuels, which is also the case for a lot of Southeast Asian countries, and they need to manage multiple risks. One is climate. There's a volatile political situation. There's a report that came out earlier this year that Bangladesh, Cambodia, Pakistan, and Vietnam, 4 countries that account for 18% of world textile production, are set to lose 1 million jobs by the year 2030 due to the effects of climate change, which is massive. And at the same time, the Fashion Revolution report states that 6%, only 6% of major fashion brands disclose how much they invest in renewable energy in their supply chain. And a lot of it is not direct investment, but it's contributions to joint climate funds that provide then favorable loans. So it's billion-dollar businesses providing loans to these small factories that are unable to pay minimum wage. So there's clearly something wrong here. And we're really in a situation where if businesses moved out of the country, that creates another very difficult situation. BOF spoke about, in the State of Fashion report, they spoke about the bullwhip effect of fashion market fluctuations. So when a brand loses 5% of their production order value, that, you know, because we have like so much overproduction along the line, that exponentially rises as you go up the supply chain, and that is very, very scary. So I'd like you to really think about like the full supply chain and the impact of every action that you can be taking. And then just moving on quickly to the question of technology, because right now, you know, we're in like this AI boom, and it feels like AI is going to give us all the answers. But I want to ask you, are we asking the right questions? Because I think what we're forgetting very often is that fashion is material. And there was this quote at a conference I attended recently that digital is exponential and like almost limitless in its possibilities. But I think that the person that said that forgot that digital is not divorced from the material world, as you can see, you know, evidenced by basically every massive tech company kind of falling behind on their sustainability ambitions now because of AI. And I think when we think of fashion tech and fashion AI that are like very sexy buzzwords nowadays, it's very, very important to understand whether they're really treating the symptom or truly trying to identify the issue at the core. And I want to offer you a case study. I'm going to speed up because I think I'm going over time here. But think about this: we've got $218 billion a year apparel returns problem. This is due, in many cases, due to poor fit. So a lot of investment in fashion tech is now going into giving the possibility of retailers to offer digital fits. I really want to see how that's going to work, because basically to make that work, you need to scan every body type, and you need to be scanning every garment from every fashion house, and like that, I just don't see how that is going to be possible. But this is kind of the sexy buzz technology at the moment. I think really the problem here is that you don't have consistent fits between brands to begin with, but also within a brand's offering very often. So what if we, instead of treating the kind of the symptom, what if we treated the cause, and we used AI to improve the fitting, the consistency of fitting of garments at this first stage? Wouldn't that be the better solution? And I will leave this as an open question for you, and ask you if you'd like to consider like all these places where waste is produced in the textile value chain, and again, like look at it from a system perspective and try to apply the same type of thinking, like what is the symptom, but also what is the root cause. And then just to finish, the last thing I want to mention is customer. And this maybe goes more to the marketing teams, the communication teams. I think a lot of sustainability people actually in fashion come from a marketing background very often. So they're very good with words. But marketing 101 is that you need to keep your messaging simple. And I want to ask you, is this enough? Because if you consider, like earlier this year, there was a case against ASOS, Boohoo, and Asda about whether they misstated or greenwashed their sustainability claims. And the result was that it's now mandatory for the garment labels to state the percentage of recycled content when they say that they're recycled, which is all good and great. But actually, like, would that create in the customers the demand for 100% recycled, which might not always be possible? Because actually, to have the optimal product with the least amount of impact, because you improve the durability of your product, you need to have a mix of fibers, because recycled fibers are shorter than virgin fibers. So there's studies on like the optimal mix. But if a customer sees like 40% or 60% recycled content, would they feel like, oh, maybe that's not enough, even though that's actually the best solution when it comes to emissions and impact. And then the other question I want to leave you with is that of performative sustainability, and that is creating like buzz around specific sustainability solutions that might not be fully industrialized. And again, as someone on the product side, this has always been very difficult for me, because we get demand from retailers, we get demand from customers to offer solutions that we ourselves know maybe walk the catwalk, but are not really ready for the market, because they're not at the quality that is needed to create a durable product. So with this, I'm going to wrap up and ask you to consider, a system approach of de-siloing, inclusion, integrated sustainability, and how that translates into decarbonizing. So organizations like Plan A are here to help you tackle the measuring and the reporting, as well as support you in kind of translating the necessary strategies on the path to decarbonization into actionable steps for your team. So thank you so much for bearing with me. I hope this was interesting and provocative. And if you'd like to chat more, please find me here.
Amazing. Thank you, Iva, so much. This has been so insightful. And I want to use, because we have so many questions actually in the chat and on some of our other channels, maybe we can cover a few of them. It has been so insightful, and I think people will have to take some time to digest all of the information that you shared, but that's what a good, I think, presentation in the context means. So I would kick off with the first question, which is related to consumer demand. What do you think has provoked consumer demand to shift towards more sustainable products? On one hand, Katerina is saying surveys show that interest for sustainable products is there, but on the other hand, fashion brands are really struggling to exist as customers are not willing to pay the price.
Exactly.
This means also the kind of situation to have to ask the question, shouldn't we shift away from this thinking that sustainability always comes at a cost? Because I must say, like, I do consider myself as someone that follows fashion, and it doesn't always come at the highest cost to be sustainable, I would say.
I think like you hit the nail on the head here. I think maybe we're not asking the right question one more time. I've thought about this a lot, and I feel like if we ask customers like, oh, do you want sustainable fashion? Like, of course they're going to say yes. Like, no one's going to say, no, I don't want sustainable products. But for me, the question is, why they want sustainable products, or what would make them purchase a sustainable product over the alternative? Is it the price? Is it the design? Is it the quality? What is it? Do they want more information? Do they want less information? I think, again, like we need to be asking a better question.
Yes. Thank you so much for this. Ricardo is asking an interesting question about waste, which is, I think a lot of this waste had to do with the convenience of the industry. What are your thoughts on made to order in the fashion industry? Would it allow to reduce overproduction?
Ricardo, thank you so much for saying this. So I actually founded my own footwear brand, which is a made to order wedding shoe brand, and it was extremely difficult to run it because the supply chain as such is not actually built to accommodate that need. Even if we go simpler and we say we just want to be producing less, brands are really struggling with that because of high minimums of production facilities. So this is, again, something where I don't know if it's technology, I don't know if it's business model partnerships with suppliers, but I truly believe that it's convenience, and I truly believe that made to order is one of the answers. How to get there to make it like really work commercially, for me remains an open question.
Amazing insight, and also I would say a thought-provoking open end that allows for people to also consider. Um, I would love to ask a question that is coming with regards to one that was asked by Jean-Pierre. So he's asking, what are the actual impacts of logistics? Or what are your thoughts in terms of also early development to end of life of the product? Can this be a good way to become more sustainable?
Can you repeat the beginning of the question?
It's what is the role of logistics associated with sustainability in the fashion industry?
I see. I thought I missed something in the beginning. I mean, the role of logistics is very key, and it's, I think, one of the simplest ways where you can start having impact. Again, because of the speed of how things are done nowadays, so much uh, of what is produced in the fashion industry is being shipped by air, is being shipped by plane instead of by boat. And those big scary players, like Shein, like Temu, they exploit loopholes because in America, I believe it's if you're sending packages under a certain value, you don't need to pay customs. So that's how they're able to sell like really, really cheap stuff.
Should be the other way around, I guess.
Yeah, that's why they don't have warehouses on the continent. They just ship it in. They don't have to pay any duties on it, and it's really scary. So here, one is a structural problem in the fashion industry. How do we either slow things down or create the organization to allow for things to slow down? Because when you're receiving designs at the very last minute, when you're developing collections in the very last minute, when you have like 2 months to produce something, and like 2 months like is now a luxury as well, sometimes you just don't have the physical time to be considering better logistic solutions. But when also the regulations and the policies encourage you to be acting in the most unsustainable way possible, then we've got a bigger problem, and we need to address it at a much higher level.
What an important message, and also a good way for us to finish. I think the main takeaway for me from your presentation is that there is a lot of ways you can kick off your sustainability journey as a fashion company. It really doesn't matter on which side of the business you're sitting, creative or also the more commercial side where you're promoting the product or selling the product. You should know that there's leeways in which you can be part of the journey. Are you hopeful about what can be done, or based on all the learnings that you've gathered, do you feel like there's a transition that is happening in the context of all these big fashion companies making the commitments, but also these fast fashion companies also scaling their production and also access to clients?
No, absolutely. It's a very dynamic field, and right now, if you look at the now, I don't feel like it feels very like a very positive space actually, but there is so much happening, and I think the combination of regulatory frameworks with activism, bottom up, top down, we're gonna start seeing that incremental change, and how it all starts to kind of shift the needle. So I'm definitely hopeful, but again, I would just encourage everyone that is here, again, no matter where you sit in your company, try to open these conversations, try to understand, like, in practice, what are we talking about? Because carbon, I mean, Lou can talk about carbon, and it can sound like poetry and science at the same time, and it's incredible, but maybe not everyone necessarily understands how that relates to their work. But that doesn't mean that they don't understand how they can have a positive impact. They just need your support as someone who's engaged, as someone who's probably a sustainability leader in your organization, to understand their role. Not everyone needs to be the champion, the leader, but everyone can be part of the action.
Amazing. Thank you so much to all of you that have been able to join. Thank you again. We're super excited for the next 2 sessions. As you know, these are master classes that come in 3 parts. This was the first one already. We're kicking off with a lot of insights and a lot of depth. There will be a lot of opportunities to connect to one another as well. Today, we're kicking off with a fireside chat with a presentation that goes in depth, but there will be a community building element. Make sure you sign up for the next elements. Reach out to me as well. I am available on LinkedIn. Also, the team is there. Any expertise that we can bring to the table is there. I sit on the scientific board of Chloe for sustainability. Also, we work with a lot of big fashion companies in Plan A, so we can bring a lot to the table and hopefully support anyone that is here that is still questioning how to go about on their sustainability journey. On the next steps. So yeah, thank you, Iva, again for taking time to speak to us.
My pleasure, and I believe the presentation will be shared. So for anyone that has questions or wants a further discussion, I love to talk, as you can see. I love discussion. I love to be challenged. So please reach out.
Thanks again. Thank you, everyone.